I spent 50 years building cities for millions of strangers to live in. Yet I somehow failed to build a real home for my own family. The blueprints were always perfect, but the life inside them was collapsing. Please sit with me before you make the same structural mistakes.
I remember the smell of my office more vividly than the smell of my own kitchen. It was a specific mixture of graphite shavings, stale coffee, and the sharp ozone scent of large format plotters printing out fresh blueprints. For 40 years, that office was my cathedral. I was a chief architect, a man who shaped the skyline of this city. When I drove down the interstate, I could point to the steel, skeletons rising out of the ground, and say, I did that. That feeling was intoxicating. It was a drug that convinced me that my value as a human being was directly tied to how much concrete I could pour and how high I could make the glass reach. I convinced myself that I was doing it for them, for my wife, for my children. That's the great lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? We say we are working 18-hour days to provide a better future, but in reality, we are feeding our own egos. I treated my career like a high-stakes sport. I remember missing my son's 10th birthday because of a zoning crisis on the West Side project. I didn't just miss the cake. I missed the look in his eyes when he realized I wasn't coming. I sent a gift, of course, a structurally impressive, expensive gift. But you cannot buy back the disappointment of a 10-year-old boy. At the firm, I was indispensable. I was the visionary. People waited on my every word. If a contractor messed up a foundation, I was the one who solved it. I felt powerful. I felt necessary. And when I came home exhausted at 9 p.m., the house was quiet. The problems there were soft, emotional, and messy, unlike the clean mathematical problems of architecture. I didn't know how to fix a crying child or a lonely wife, so I retreated back to where I felt competent, my work. I told myself I was building a legacy. I thought legacy was something you left behind in stone and steel. I didn't realize that the only legacy that actually matters is the memory of your presence in the minds of the people you love. I spent my life looking at the horizon, planning for a future that would be magnificent, while the present moment, the only place where life actually happens, crumbled right beneath my feet. It didn't happen with a scream or a slammed door. The collapse of a marriage rarely does. In my line of work, we talk about structural fatigue, the slow, invisible weakening of a beam under a constant load until one day it just snaps. That is exactly what happened to us. My wife and I didn't fight. In fact, if you looked at us from the outside, we were the model of stability. We were efficient. We managed the household logistics perfectly. We paid the bills. We hosted the dinner parties and we attended the galas. But somewhere along the line, we stopped being lovers and started being roommates who shared a checking account. I remember coming home one evening in my late 50s. She was sitting in the sunroom, reading. I walked in, poured a drink, and sat opposite her. We exchanged perhaps 3 sentences about the weather and the grocery list. And then, silence. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. I realized in that terrifying moment that I didn't know who she was anymore. I knew her schedule. I knew her favorite wine. But I didn't know what she dreamed about. I didn't know what she feared. I had stopped dating my wife decades ago because I assumed the relationship was a completed project. I thought that once you said "I do," the construction was finished and you could just live in it. I was wrong. A relationship is not a building, it is a garden. If you do not water it, if you do not tend to the weeds, it dies. I neglected the maintenance. I let the resentment grow like ivy over the windows until we couldn't see each other. We slept in the same king-sized bed, mere inches apart, but the emotional distance between us was an ocean. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling I had designed, listening to her breathe, and feeling an intense, hollow loneliness. We were together, yet we were utterly alone. She eventually stopped asking for my time. She stopped asking for my attention, and that, I learned too late, is the death knell. When they stop fighting for your attention, it means they have already grieved the loss of you and moved on, even if they are still sitting in the same room. If my marriage was a neglected building, my relationship with my children was a project I simply outsourced. I was a provider. That was the title I hid behind. I provided the private schools, I provided the piano lessons, I provided the college tuition checks. I approached parenting with the same transactional logic I used in business. I provide the capital, you provide the results. I thought my job was to ensure they survived and succeeded. I didn't understand that my job was actually to know them. I have a distinct memory of my daughter when she was perhaps 7. She came into my study while I was working on a set of elevations for a library. She wanted to show me a drawing she had made. I didn't even turn my chair around fully. I glanced over my shoulder, said, "That's beautiful, sweetheart," and turned back to my drafting table. I chose the paper buildings over the real human being standing behind me. I did that thousands of times. Thousands of tiny rejections. Eventually, she stopped coming into the study. She learned that Dad was busy, that Dad was important, and that her role was to not disturb the genius at work. Now, my children are adults. They are successful. They are polite. And they are strangers. They visit me here on holidays, out of a sense of duty. The conversations are stiff and formal. We talk about the economy, the weather, their jobs, but they never tell me when they are hurting. They never ask me for advice on their hearts. Why would they? I never applied for that job. To them, I am a financier, not a father. I see other men my age laughing with their adult children, sharing inside jokes, holding their grandchildren with a familiarity I will never have. It is a specific kind of agony to be respected by your children, but not known by them. I built them a house, yes, I gave them a roof over their heads, but I never built a relationship. I was an absentee landlord in their lives, and now, in the winter of my life, the lease is up, and the house is empty. Then came the day I had been running toward my entire life. Retirement, the finish line. I remember standing in the glass atrium of the firm I had helped build. There was a party. There was a cake shaped like my most famous tower. Younger associates, men and women in their 30s with hungry eyes, shook my hand and told me I was a legend. They gave me a golden drafting compass in a velvet box, a symbolic gesture for a man whose tools were no longer needed. And then, the next morning, I woke up and the phone didn't ring. For the first few weeks, I told myself it was a vacation. But soon, the silence of the house became deafening. I realized that my entire identity had been printed on a business card that I no longer carried. Without the title of chief architect, I didn't know who I was. I walked through the city I had designed, and I saw new construction going up, buildings I didn't approve, styles I didn't like. The city was evolving without my permission, indifferent to my existence. It was a brutal realization. The world moves on instantly. The concrete dries, the ribbon is cut, and the architect is forgotten. I looked at the awards on my study wall, the lifetime achievement, the urban design excellence. They felt like cold, dead things. They were just plaques of brass and wood. They couldn't ask me how my day was. They couldn't hold my hand when my arthritis flared up. I had traded the warmth of human connection for the cold validation of professional status. And now, in the quiet afternoons of my 80s, that status offered no comfort. I had spent so much energy worrying about my public legacy, about how history would remember me. But standing here now, looking at the wrinkles on my hands, I realized that history doesn't care. The only people who would have truly remembered me, my family, were the ones I pushed to the margins. I had climbed to the top of the ladder, only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. Now I spend my days in this sanctuary. It is a beautiful room. The light hits the bookshelves just right in the late afternoon. I designed this house, after all. I accounted for the solar orientation, the cross-ventilation, the flow of space. It is a masterpiece of design, but it is also a museum of my regrets. I sit here and I think about the concept of home. As an architect, I defined a home by its walls, its roof, its structural integrity. I was obsessed with the container, ignoring the contents. I have come to understand that a true home has nothing to do with architecture. A home is not built of bricks and mortar. It is built of time and attention. It is built of messy breakfasts on Sunday mornings, of arguments resolved with a hug, of shared silence that doesn't feel heavy. I see now that I lived my life in the front elevation, the facade that faces the street, the part everyone sees. I kept it polished, impressive, and imposing. But the interior, the rooms where the soul lives, I left unfurnished. I was so afraid of being ordinary that I forgot to be happy. There is a peace in this realization, though it is a melancholy peace. I have stopped trying to design the future. I have stopped trying to fix the past. I simply sit here with the reality of my choices. I watch the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and I appreciate them for what they are. I have learned that solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of being alone. Solitude is the glory of being alone. I have made friends with my solitude now. It is my final companion. But if I could go back to the drawing board, if I could draft one last blueprint, I would erase the skyscrapers. I would erase the awards. I would draw a small, imperfect house filled with noise and chaos and love. I would design a life that was lived, not just admired. The scaffolding of your career will eventually be taken down, leaving only you.
Go now and build a life that does not need to be renovated later. The scaffolding of your career will eventually be taken down, leaving only you. Make sure that what remains standing is a life worth living, not just working. I am leaving the light on for you, but you must walk through the door.